I want to thank you again for joining us for this session, Continuum of Connectedness, Strategies and Considerations for the Development and Implementation of Tribal Youth Substance Use Reduction Initiatives. I am very blessed today to be joined by several of my colleagues at the Tribal Youth Resource Center, and we can go to the next slide. I want to invite my new friend and colleague, Leon Leadercharge, to open us in a good way for this session.
Oh, Betuashte Medakuye Oyasin. Good day, and I wanted to remind everyone that in some type of way we're related. So just to let you know that you are my relatives, and I wanted to open this session with a aloha, a song that reminds us of peace, love, respect, compassion, and just overall goodness. So bear with me as we send a voice. Ya, 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 Yo, 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 hey, yo, 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 ha, yo, 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 ha, yo, 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 hey, yo, oh, I bet you I stay metakuye oyase. Thank you.
Ado, Leon, thank you. We have several facilitators for this session today, and so I would invite them to introduce themselves today, and we'll start with Gerry.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and along with my colleagues, I'm one of the training and technical assistance specialists with TYRC. I'm a member of the Nehio Nation. Many people refer to us as the Cree. However, we are returning to our traditional names for many of our native nations, and I am a huge proponent of that. And so I am a Nehio, a member of the people of four. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerry. Chris?
You all heard me from the last session. I'm Chris Pacheco, and I'm a wellness course specialist with Tribal Law and Policy Institute. And so by training, I'm a licensed drug and alcohol abuse counselor in the state of New Mexico. But I did start my career off at a school-based teen health center as an adolescent counselor. And I also did some work as a prevention specialist. So this topic is very near and dear to my heart because I believe prevention works. I also believe that healing to wellness courts work. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Chris. And Leon?
Out, Leon Leadercharge Machapi na wakia tokamani Lakota Chejana Ososo Wakpa Matahana Chichangu Oglala Lakota. My name is Leon Leadercharge, and I'm an enrolled member of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe and also part of the Oglala Sioux Tribe. And today I'm patching in on this beautiful conference from a small community on the Rosebud Sioux Tribe Reservation called He-Dog. So I'm up here in the Cut Meat Creek. My background's in prevention and addiction counseling, and also education administration, adult higher ed. And I am a training and technical assistance specialist with the Tribal Youth Resource Center. Thank you.
Thank you. And I was also on the last session and have introduced in other parts of the conference, but just to say, Hinche, Estango, Anna Clough, Chahochipkos. My name is Anna Clough. I am Muskogee Creek in Uchee. I reside here in Oklahoma, but I grew up near Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the Creek Reservation. I am an attorney by practice, but have had the wonderful opportunity to be involved in training and technical assistance with OJJDP for the last several years and work with our juvenile healing to wellness courts and also with the other prevention programs and initiatives that are funded by OJJDP. So wonderful opportunities to connect with many of you in the past. And for those of you that are new, really welcome you into this space and hope that you enjoy this session. So we can go to the next slide. So today our session objectives are really to look at substance use, review some current data on drugs, alcohol, and trends that are impacting American Indian and Alaska Native youth. We want to discuss the need for early intervention, prevention, and diversion-based programs to support tribal youth. And we'll consider research and training to support the development of youth-focused substance use reduction initiatives in tribal communities. And at the Tribal Youth Resource Center, we do primarily serve tribal youth programs and tribal healing to wellness courts, which are funded under the Coordinated Tribal Assistance Solicitation. And so these are early intervention programs that might be community-based, school-based, things like boys and girls clubs, after-school programs, mentoring programs, and also our juvenile healing to wellness courts, which primarily are working with youth who may already be court involved or who have been identified to be living with substance use disorders, addiction, or engaging in the use of illicit substances and delinquency. So we have those programs that we work with, and we can also work with any other federally recognized tribe. So this session really is focusing at that basic level of what do we know is happening in Indian country related to youth substance use. And I'm really thankful for Chris here today, who's going to talk to us a little bit more just about recent research and findings and things that we should be aware of as practitioners. So with that, Chris, I'll hand the session over to you.
Thank you, Anna. Next slide. So just to set the context of today's presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about some impacts of drugs and current drugs choice that we are seeing among our adolescents, but we're also going to end in a good way on how do we prevent that? How do we create these community programs? So just to set this context, with the impact of drugs, with the impacts of drugs, that sometimes our adolescents start drug use or taking drugs as an experiment or with their peers. But oftentimes, many of these misused drugs, they can alter a person's thinking or judgment and lead to health risks. Unfortunately, sometimes our adolescents become addicted to these drugs, may engage in drug or alcoholic driving, driving while under the influence, and also, unfortunately, may have contracted infectious diseases. So they put themselves in high risk situations while under the influence. Also, most drugs can potentially harm an unborn baby and cause pregnancy related issues and also other negative effects. So we unfortunately, those of us who are in the field, we know that this is the impact of drugs in our communities and among adolescents. Okay, next slide. So these are some of the commonly used drugs that we see or we hear as we're working with adolescents, and they may vary from community to community based on, opportunity for them to come into that community. And then also there tend to be trends. I know a few years back, there were some increase in cases of the synthetic bath salts, also the over-the-counter medications such as that include the dextromethorphan, ketamine. Unfortunately, has also been popular in some of our communities. However, unfortunately, in tribal communities, alcohol, marijuana, we are now seeing an increase in methamphetamine use and also in opioids that are happening in our community. And if, once again, knowing what we are working with in these commonly abused drugs also helps us, one, to provide impactful treatment to that individual, but also to provide impactful prevention resources in our community when we know what we are working with or what we're dealing with, or are what drugs are in our community. Our best place is to work with our law enforcement. They are the eyes and ears of our community. They can tell you and work with you to let you know what are the drug trends within our communities. So definitely working with our law enforcement helps. Okay, next slide. As I said before, alcohol has been a constant in some of the work that we've done with our healing to wellness courts, with our juvenile programs. And it's one of those things that is um, it's hard to kind of get to have a very big stance on, because it is legal. It is legal in all of our states, um, or in many of our states. But we also have our own individual tribal sovereignty, which some tribes will allow or won't allow alcohol on their tribal lands. For example, in my community, in the Pueblo Laguna, because we have two large gaming operations, alcohol is allowed. However, for our juvenile and our adolescent population, it is still illegal for any of our minors to have or to possess or to be under the influence of alcohol. And alcohol, when used responsibly, when used appropriately, people use alcohol to socialize, to celebrate, and to relax. It has a strong effect in our history. People have struggled to understand how is it that we manage to manage this alcohol, the alcohol's power. Um, Alcohol can also impact person from person in a variety of ways, depending on many of factors. As I was getting my degree, there are many theories out there of why one becomes addicted or why one becomes succumbs to alcohol issues. One is, how much a person drinks, and we look at that as an increase in tolerance. As a person drinks alcohol on a regular basis, they need more and more alcohol to gain the same effect as they got when they first took their first drink. Okay, we call that tolerance. Um, and then also, how often are they drinking? Is this an individual who is waking up in the morning and having that first shot of alcohol, that first beer, whatever it is, whatever they're drinking, in order to um, to stave off the effects of the hangover that they're having. Also, when we look at alcohol and some of the issues that it may cause, is what age, at what age did they start consuming alcohol? As a clinician, when I was doing intakes and assessments, it would always amaze me when someone would tell me I started drinking at 6. And I would, further ask, well, 6, how, what was going on at 6? And oftentimes it would be that their parents or their families would have parties in their home and everybody would pass out, and this little 6-year-old would be the only one up the next morning and going around and drinking, looking for the empties, or drinking what was left in the bottles or the glasses or the cups. So really they did start drinking at age 6. So at what age did a person start drinking is something that we also take into consideration. Also, health status. We have individuals who have pre-existing health conditions such as diabetes or heart conditions, and these are made or complicated by their alcohol use. Alcohol, is empty calories and can cause a lot of weight gain, but also is filtered through the liver and can cause liver damage. So understanding what an individual's health status is, also family history. Does this individual come from a history of family where they drink, where they, you know, where there were parties at, every weekend, or do they come from a family where alcohol was used to celebrate a 2-year-old's birthday? Okay. Do they have a history of individuals who have passed away from alcohol related health issues? Do they have family that have passed away from alcohol related accidents or alcohol related causes? So these are things that we would take into consideration with alcohol. Next slide. So some of the considerations for our youth. So one of the things that CDC does is a youth risk behavior survey. And the last survey, the most recent survey, was in 2017. And again, I want to just let you know that this is national data, that unless your tribal community decides to partake in some of these data collection methods, um, you know, this is still national data. So during this time, 14% of high school students reported that they have used an illicit drugs. And when we talk about illicit drugs, we're talking about things such as heroin or marijuana, those drugs which the federal government has deemed to be illegal or illicit. So, the earlier age of initiation of drug or alcohol use, the higher likelihood of developing a substance use disorder, which is the new terminology based on our DSM 5. So, later on in life, however, there are multiple factors that may impact adolescent substance misuse, including parental substance use behavior, peer influences, media messaging and marketing, the availability of alcohol to them, and other environmental and cultural factors. And I just wanted to touch a little bit about the availability. For example, if we are looking at if there is a liquor store or an establishment that sells alcohol, and that there is a youth who knows an adult who will buy for them, or they know that this establishment is not ethical in their practices, and so they may sell to youth. So how likely are we, is that in a community to happen? Also media messaging and marketing. When I was a prevention specialist, this was something that I paid attention to and we paid attention to very closely, was how is it that alcohol and alcoholic beverages are marketed to, first of all, the public in general, but how are they marketed to our youth, even though that is not their primary target population? There is still concern of how alcohol is marketed, commercials, billboards, signage at a grocery store near a cash register. How is it that it is being marketed to? And of course, parental substance use behavior definitely plays an impact in our youth misusing alcohol, because they see it. They see it in their home. Their attitudes and their thoughts about how they drink, or what is drunk, or how the behavior is in this household, definitely impacts, sometimes possibly more than even their peers, which we see on this is one of those influencers as well. Next slide. So the long asked question is, if we know all of these things about alcohol and drugs, if we know there is a possibly a path to misusing or possible addiction, or some of the health concerns with alcohol or drug use, Why is it that alcohol, or excuse me, why is it that youth use or try drugs? Well, there's many reasons. One, for new experiences, experimentation. They want to try something new. Um, and unfortunately, in this day and age, sometimes they're attempting to deal with problems, school problems, home issues, bullying issues. So they will attempt to take away some of those feelings with their use of drugs or alcohol. Also, to perform better in school. I, cannot imagine how some of our students today continue to perform at such high levels, or to get through a day in school with there's a lot of pressure, especially as you get into your junior or senior year of getting into a college, or making these great decisions and wanting to do better in school. Also peer pressure, as I said before, finding work, hanging out with that cohort of individuals that support this type of behavior, um, is often one of the reasons why youth use. Also, natural tendencies to seek new experience and take risks. Remember, they're adolescents, they're young people. They want to try things. They oftentimes, some of our individuals think they're invincible, that nothing can hurt them, that, tomorrow is too far away. They want to live in the now. They want to experience things. So our adolescents are natural risk takers. So these are just a few reasons why our youth use or try drugs. Next slide. So here are some drug use and its risks. So, teen drug use can be part of a pattern of risky behavior, which unfortunately sometimes can include unsafe sex, driving while intoxicated or under the influence, or other hazardous unsupervised activities, such as, and we talked about some of those risk taking behaviors while they're under the influence. Um, some of the results can have serious or social health effects and sometimes lifelong consequences. School failure. When I was working at my school based teen health center, oftentimes I would get individuals who were smoking marijuana during the school day, and come to find out, in talking with them, come to find out that they maybe were in a grade behind. They were not doing well. There may have been some other educational issues that were not diagnosed yet or not seen yet. Um, so school failure can be one of them. Problems with family and other relationships. You know, parents trying to tell an adolescent that, no, you can't go out with your friends because the last time you did it, you ended up coming home drunk, or you didn't come home at all. Okay. So that can cause tension in a family, or even other relationships with either other family members or even other peers. There can be also a loss of interest in normal, healthy activities. When an individual is under the influence, they only know how to participate in activities or even daily life under the influence. Any kind of normal, healthy activity may not appeal to them unless they can do it under the influence. So they lose this interest in those healthy activities. Also, impaired memory. Um, the brain is still developing at this age. We've heard studies and we've seen studies that the brain does not completely develop until the age of 25. And I'm sure there are some new studies coming out that maybe even a little bit later. But when you are ingesting drugs, or you are under the influence of alcohol at some pretty high levels, there is some damage. There is some ability or some um, capability of impairing memory. Also, increased risk of contracting an infectious disease. via risky sexual behavior or sharing contaminated works is also possible. Once again, these are individuals they're who may not be making the best decisions while under the influence, and may be engaging in sexual behavior with individuals, and don't they may not know them, or it may be a party situation where they may have been taken advantage of. So these are things that often cause sexually transmitted diseases, or excuse me, sexually transmitted infections. And then also, as the use gets more and more, they may find that they are using intravenously, and so they may start sharing contaminated injection equipment, which can lead to different types of there's hepatitis, there's the HIV infection, so it can increase that. Also, mental health problems, mental health issues, including substance use disorder, can vary in severity. We have individuals who may have some depression issues, some anxiety that is going on, and so their use may start to deal with some of these mental health issues, but in return, it gets worse. It does not help. And also, unfortunately, a risk of overdose um, is is the one that is the most deadliest of these risks. Next slide.
So that brings us to the bigger picture and monitoring the future of 2020. National survey of almost 12,000 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. They have the biggest subjects that were brought up were vaping nicotine roughly doubled for all grade levels. And a little bit about vaping, there isn't quite as much extensive research out there that proves how dangerous it can be. So it's, cautious. Marijuana use remains steady, and there's been a gradual decline of alcohol use for all grade levels, and an increase of inhalant use among 8th graders. And also, we want to talk about the CDC Youth Risk Behavior Survey data that was mentioned earlier in a few slides before this one. And the initiation of drug and alcohol use, the higher the likelihood of developing a substance use disorder earlier in life. So, meaning if the youth are exposed to alcohol or drugs earlier in life, they're more than likely to have a increased problem with substance use disorder. So I think for us, it's important to mention some of these facts that are backed by research. Next slide, please. Native American populations, alcohol and marijuana continue to be the drugs of choice among Native youth. The NIH, National Institute of Health, January 2021, says methamphetamine overdose deaths sharply rose nationwide. National Institute Drug Abuse, NIDA, a-year analysis of methamphetamine deaths across all racial and ethnic groups. Native Americans had the highest death rates overall. So we just want to make sure to emphasize that alcohol and marijuana continue to be the drugs of choice. The recent NIH data states meth overdose sharply rose nationwide, with Native Americans having the highest death rate. Next slide, please. American Indian, Alaska Native, and youth considerations. 2018 National Survey on Drug Use and Health for the American Indian, Alaska Native. This is National Survey on Drug Use and Health, is also known as the NISDA, the acronym. Frequent marijuana use associated with opioid misuse, heavy alcohol use, depression in youth 12 to 17, young adults 18 to 25. So that kind of leads us into the next topic here, the bullet point, co-occurring substance use and mental health disorders are common. So if you look at the first bullet point, it talks about how the marijuana and opioid misuse and alcohol, heavy alcohol use, and the depression is high in youth. Sometimes what can happen, what the research is saying is alcohol is used to medicate depression. Marijuana is used if there is an opioid around. That's what the research is saying. So sometimes, if there's stress, anxiety, all these different co-occurring mental health disorders, then the substance can be used as a equalizer in your central nervous system. Neurotransmitters are a little bit off balance. So what happens is the substance tries to replace some of that misbalance. A little bit of brain science there where we're talking about how the impact has not only the physical part, but the mental health part of the body. And there's a need to develop more culturally relevant prevention and intervention approaches. So we'd just like to say, one recent study called the drum-assisted recovery therapy for Native Americans, DARTNA, is proven that drum circles are great for prevention and intervention approaches. So, next slide, please.
So as you can see, there's a continuum. And when we look at these protective and risk factors that are involved in our communities, you'll understand that when we go upstream, or when we go into our past and those traditional practice-based interventions and programs that were present way before anyone else was here, you'll see that it was all about prevention, and that this idea that culture is prevention and prevention is culture really resonates with many of our communities that are involved in youth-generated activities that address substance abuse and other alcohol and substance abuse activities. And when we talk about intervention, looking back at our traditional healing practices like our sweat lodges, our different ways in which we used natural medicines like plants and smudging and other things that really involved the whole community and each of the gifts and the talents and skills and teachings that they each brought to the circle. And then finally, when we think about, okay, how do we keep our young people from going back if they've been in treatment, or if they've been arrested, or if they've been incarcerated, or if they've been suspended from school, or they've been ostracized in some way, that we can go back and look at these restorative justice practices. We can look at our healing to wellness efforts, and at the same time incorporating, again, those traditional principles and philosophies that have been a part of our cultural lifestyles ever since the beginning of time. And so when we think about prevention, intervention, and diversion, they're all a part of the community whole. And many times people have talked about this idea that it takes a whole village to raise a child. And that was especially true in our Indigenous communities, because when someone was not present to observe and pay attention and share stories or activities with our young people, then someone else stepped up, an auntie and an uncle, an older brother or sister, a cousin, and a grandparent. And they did these things, and they made sure that everyone was accounted for, and so that they could address each and every one of them individually and as a group. And so this became one of the most important protective factors in our communities. Next slide. And so when we talk about community-led prevention, when we talk about culture is prevention, when we look at the protective factors that are inherent and are a organic part of our circles of living, you'll understand that when we think about early intervention, it's really about engaging our tribal youth right from the very beginning. Nothing about us without us is the slogan and the phrase that really resonates with our young people when we think about types of programs and initiatives, activities that we want to put up for them. But if they are not involved, then they're not going to be engaged, they're not going to have ownership, and they're not going to be as interested. So we need to ensure that we focus our efforts on that connectedness to our culture, our views, our values, our philosophies, our language, our ceremonies, our songs and dances. And if they're not a part of our prevention efforts, then it's less likely that we're going to be successful in keeping our young people off of those harmful drugs and other substances that will create a pathway to possible incarceration and time and time again being a part of the juvenile justice system. And so we want these community-oriented strategies to include the sense of belonging, a sense of developing appropriate skills, having a sense of independence and interdependence, providing them with practice and opportunities to be competent and confident in who they are and having that identity that they are part of this community, this tribe, this nation that really believes in the ancestors' teachings, the principles and the protocols that sustained that particular culture over time and through the generations. And so when we think about the seventh generation, today, our young people are that seventh generation. And people of my age group, we were the seventh generation at one time as well. And what that really means for many of us, we understand that the seventh generation is all about thinking about what we're doing today, making decisions, making plans, creating programs, and utilizing those principles and those practices that will impact in a positive way our grandchildren's grandchildren. That's how far into the future that our original indigenous peoples thought about when they were on this turtle island, moving and doing and practicing and growing and harvesting and nurturing their young people, and then honoring the elders who were handing down that knowledge from generation to generation. So again, if we focus on the connectedness and that sense of belonging to the culture, and know that our community is all involved, they're all engaged in the strategies that will create that sense of connectedness, then we're going to succeed in creating a healthy pathway for our young people to adulthood. Next slide. And so to conclude this part of the section, we build upon our protective factors. Oftentimes, we have institutions, academics, and other people who are outside of our community come in and tell us, here's what's wrong with you. You guys have the highest rates of this and that. And by the time they get done with those statistics and those numbers, we feel discouraged. And we believe that if we look at it from a strength-based approach, we focus first on those protective factors, then we're going to build this sense of connectedness, the sense of empowerment, the sense of confidence, and the sense that, wow, look at what we've done over the years to survive and thrive despite all of these efforts to wipe us off the face of this earth. They haven't succeeded, and they never will, because if we focus on all of those principles and values that made our people strong, that resiliency that we've developed will continue from this generation to the next. And our protective factors will continue to be a part of any strategic planning efforts that we have. So at the heart of it and at the center of it will be the culture. And that if we believe that culture is prevention, then we are going to have a thriving, successful journey as a part of our cultural connectedness. Anna, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Go ahead. Yep, we're right there on the right side. I just want to tell Gerry and Leon and Chris, thank you for all the information that was shared. And I appreciate what Gerry just shared about how when we hear all this data and hear all this information about here's all the negative implications for American Indian youth, and just taking that and understanding that, you know, number one, we know that a lot of the times that data is lacking. It doesn't actually include our communities and our youth. And then secondarily, you know, not focusing on the negative, but taking that information and really utilizing it to strengthen our programs and to really focus in on what's the true need here for our community, and building our programs around what's needed locally. And so appreciate everything that's been shared so far. When we talked about the development of this session, we really wanted to build on, you know, what do we know about factors and considerations for American Indian youth generally, but how can we as individuals focus on the development of programs that intervene as early as possible, and then consider, you know, how are we supporting youth who may already be involved within the court system. And so that's why we labeled this session the Continuum of Connectedness, because youth need that connectedness not only early to build them up, to help them build that resiliency and to be diverted away from these interactions with harmful substances. But then for those youth who may have already been exposed or already living with the substance use disorder, how do we continue building that connectedness to keep them from moving further into a juvenile justice system? And so when we look at those early interventions, our tribal youth programs that are supporting youth all over the country in different communities and focusing on that prevention aspect. And a lot of these programs are school or community-based. They embrace culture and incorporate that tradition through teachings, through activities where they're able to learn from trusted adults who want to be there, their relatives or community members who are supporting those youth and trying to keep them off that trajectory. There's opportunities in tribal youth programs, like we've already talked about in many of our sessions in this conference, that allow our youth to become the leaders and engage their peers and promote those substance use reduction activities and initiatives through high levels of peer engagement and sharing that knowledge, sharing that wisdom amongst peers, and really trying to change the community's stance on, you know, we don't want ourselves or our peers to be engaged in the use of these substances. And there are a range of programs and service opportunities there that are available based on those local community resources and partnerships and collaborations. So there are a number of tribal youth programs who are after-school based, mentoring programs, but I really enjoyed on Tuesday hearing about Canoe Journey, something that is traditional, and I liked when there was a statement that was specifically made that this is a drug and alcohol-free activity. So really that community expectation and norm that this is something that we're not going to be engaged in the use of substances when we're engaging in this activity. And so changing our youth perceptions and bringing them into the circle of connectedness is so important. Next slide. So when we were talking about how do we support youth who may already be court involved, we look at initiatives like the Tribal Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court, or the implementation of court-based programs that can divert youth from further moving into the juvenile justice system and connecting them with resources and services that really can help with that addiction, help with the substance use disorder, and support them in finding ways and treatment to be on a better path. So there are a number of diversion programs that may not be a juvenile healing to wellness court that also address substance use through treatment and support, counseling, and promoting that behavior change. But we specifically at the TYRC support Purpose Area 8 which supports youth who are court involved and can have individualized case management and services as part of a juvenile healing to wellness court case plan. And this is a team-based approach. It is mostly to support youth who are high risk, high need, but we know that some communities have youth who are more moderately engaged in the use of substances, or who may have problematic behaviors that we know are associated with the use of illicit substances. And so they may have a plan that supports them within a wellness court framework. Next slide.
Sorry. This leads us into our next slide, where we're talking about sustaining programs success along the community, or along the continuum, sorry. One of the models that is widely used is the community-based participatory research model, and indigenizing it into the tribal community-based participatory research is a development of collaborative and community-based participatory research, support capacity building through tribally led research initiatives, culturally specific intervention and assessment, promote program efficacy and sustainability. So I think for us, it's really important to understand that what works for us and Indigenous communities, in terms of creating our own research teams, institutional review boards, planning and implementation, and most importantly, ownership of data, and our knowledge and understanding of the issues that needs to be addressed through this whole process. So this really leads us into taking advantage of our own autonomy, self-determination, and tribal sovereignty. Is really getting a grasp on telling our story from our perspective and publishing that data. I'm a huge proponent of that. Work on several initiatives where we've done just that, published our own data from a tribal community perspective, and taking the reins on owning our own database. Next slide, please. Addressing challenges to support program initiatives. Some of the challenges that come up, these are some of the things that are really important. Building trust and cohesion in the community, involvement of community stakeholders and also leadership, supporting the mission long-term, sustainability, and that really leads us not to just come in and go on, but letting the community know that the mission is long-term. Evaluation, program improvement. Going back earlier, we watched, we were part of the logic model and part of the evaluation presentations, where we show that it's always great to evaluate what the work we're doing so we can sharpen it up and be more impactful. Training and program support. We know and understand that there are challenges, but there are also ways to address the challenges, so that's important. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Leon. So when we were thinking about how to support those of you who are joining this session who might not only be OJJDP grantees, but you may be new to the development of a tribal youth program, or you may be interested in the development of a juvenile healing to wellness court. And this session was designed to provide us with some initial information about the types of programs and services that are offered through the Tribal Youth Resource Center, but to also get acquainted with the tribal youth programs who focus on early intervention and prevention, as well as our juvenile healing to wellness court programs that are working with youth who are already court involved. And so building out of this session is the opportunity for OJJDP grantees as well as non-OJJDP grantees to participate in future learning that begins with that early intervention along our continuum all the way into our juvenile healing to wellness court. And so this spring, we are going to be offering some training that will be led by Gerry, who's been on this session today, to talk about those strategic frameworks that are culturally based and community supportive. And Leon with his training in locally led data initiatives. And so that is supportive of our tribal youth programs, of anyone who is interested in beginning that process of developing an early intervention for their tribal youth. And then we're also going to be offering some additional training for treatment court professionals. And we'll be hosting 2 sessions in May, late April and May, for our tribal juvenile healing to wellness courts, or anyone who's interested in learning more about the aspects of treatment and services for tribal youth who are court involved or in the community and in need of those types of services. And so we're really excited to offer all of those. And it's just building out of this session the opportunity that we know that there are youth all along the spectrum. And as a center, we're here to support along that spectrum. And we want to offer training supportive of anywhere you are or anywhere that you're wanting to offer resources and programs for your youth in your community. So at this time, what I want to do is just open up our question and answer pod and also the chat. I know that Chris shared a lot of information at the beginning of our session, specifically about substance use, tribal youth, and some of the trends that we're seeing. And then Leon shared as well on some current data. So if there are questions or if there is any commentary, feel free to add that in the chat box, and I'll wait just a minute. Chris, I'll let you come back in if there was anything that you wanted to share after speaking. I always know after I end a section of material, sometimes things will come to mind that I had wanted to share during my portion of the training. So we have time now for questions. And also, if there's any questions about this upcoming training, feel free to ask that as well.
Just wanted to mention that that again, working in collaboration not only with our law enforcement to understand what are the drugs trends in our own community, but developing a relationship with our youth, and kind of just making sure that they're inclusive in some of the programming that we put forth in our communities. When I was a prevention specialist, we could create these awesome, beautiful programs that we thought were awesome and beautiful as adults. But, sometimes the juveniles, or the youth that we were gearing them toward, we're like, oh, we don't want to do that. Kind of like Dave, when Dave mentioned these programs were mandatory, the kids just didn't want to go to them. But once he, opened up and said, yeah, come if you want. And then they start to bring their fellow family members or cousins or brothers. So really engaging youth in the development of some of those prevention or early intervention programs is very critical.
I know earlier you brought up as part of the conversation that we were having about drug use and youth, I know you mentioned marketing, and I know recently I've seen some things about, we know that there's states where you have legal use of some substances and looking at marketing of edibles or other things like that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
This is, and I'm glad you brought that up, because as we have, more states who are considering making marijuana legalized, and and how is that going to impact our youth, in the discussion, and even how we as tribal communities deal with that and work with that. As of today, even though my home state of New Mexico, it's being considered in our state legislation, it's being considered we as a tribal nation still have the sovereignty as to what will happen on our tribal lands. And so, making sure that our tribes have a voice in those kind of discussions, or having considerations. But I agree with you, Anna. There is this marketing concept. We used to only just worry about alcohol and tobacco, and now we see these advertisements for the edibles, and the gummies, and the types of candies that are, they're put in the they're marketing now, and I think, yeah, those are definitely being marketed towards our youth. Used to be, when I was working as a prevention specialist, the alcohol pops, the sugary, the tasting kind of alcoholic beverages, those were definitely being marketed towards our youth. But yeah, this is one of those reasons why we as practitioners really need to stay current and up to date on what are the trends, not only just within our community, but what is going on nationally.
Gerry, I know you introduced some of those conversations around getting a program started. What are some of the things that you think are challenges for communities getting initiatives started? And then what's some advice that you would give?
Well, a couple of the more prevalent challenges in our Native communities when we want to engage youth is that they've already been persuaded by what Kristina was mentioning around marketing. When I was involved in tobacco prevention, all of the tobacco companies were putting their tobacco products at eye level of our young children, ages 12 and under. And they encouraged our young people to steal these products because the clerk would be behind the counter, the products would be in front of the counter, and it was very, very convenient. I guess that's why they call them convenience stores, for the young people to take what they felt like was going to give them this extraordinary and interesting, exciting experience, right? But when in fact the tobacco companies had a marketing strategy way before that, that as long as they allowed these young people to steal a pack of cigarettes, they would come back when they were addicted and they would have to start buying the product. And it's the same way with these edibles and some of these other drugs of choice. Oftentimes we as Native people really need to go back and find out when did that start taking place and what were we doing before that to keep our young people especially on that path to responsible adulthood. And so it may require all of us to go even earlier in our age groups to begin the process of reintroducing our cultural protective factors, that it should be a whole age group phenomena, meaning that we start with our infants and we work up all the way through the elders and we instill in them these sense of connectedness. How do we do that? One is for many of our traditional Native families, for example, we have name-giving ceremonies. So when the baby is first born, they're given a nickname by one of the elders. The elders are approached and are given a gift offered to traditional tobacco, not commercial tobacco, traditional tobacco, right, as an offering. And then so begins that cycle. As long as that young person is involved in those cultural activities, those practices, those ceremonies, they're going to see, experience, and become a part of it. And then they will take it up on themselves to do the same things that they're observing. Their parents, their older siblings are participating. And so you create that role modeling, that mentoring experience. And so that's where we need to begin, I believe, if we really want our young people to be engaged and to do it right from the very beginning. And have them give voice to what it is that they need, what it is that they prefer, what it is that interests them, what gives them passion about our culture, and provide those opportunities and the resources. Oftentimes, we got to basically do what we can with what we have where we are. And Native people have always been able to do that very successfully.
Thank you, Gerry. I know that in our continued training series that you'll be able to build more on that, and we'll have additional training sessions just to have these open discussions about, what do we know is helpful within our own communities, and how can we start building this based on what our perceptions are of the needs, what our traditions are. And I feel like that's how we always want to support and start with, what's important to you in your own community. So Leon, I'll come back to you now. I know you shared a little bit about participatory research, but I know that we want to have some continued conversations on that. Can you share with us a little bit what communities might hear more in some of the additional training that you'll provide?
Sure, I actually got to be a principal investigator in the National Institute of Drug Abuse Research Fellowship from my experience. Had a summer program called the Summer Program for Undergraduate Research in Addiction. And I got to go and do my own research in my own tribal community along with my professor. And what we did is we measured the screening, brief intervention, or further treatment in terms of cultural validity in a tribal setting. And we trained the expert model. And what it is a screening, alcohol screening, where people can learn how to gauge their own alcohol use to see if they're in risk of having low risk behavior drinking patterns. And we did a pre and post test. And what we found was a need to have an assessment component, because if there's people going to expert, the qualitative portion of the research project, if there are individuals going to find that they might have a low risk substance use disorder issue on their hands, then there needs to be a need of where to find a proper assessment by a licensed counselor, addiction counselor in our state. And also a need for adaptation to cultural community concerns, cohesion building, most importantly, planting that seed in our own indigenous population to promote and to do these research projects. We had to go through the tribal council, and also the institutional review board at that time was active, and we just lost our point of contact IRB person. He passed on the day we submitted our materials for IRB approval from a tribal level. We used the IHS Indian Health Services IRB template, and it was so thorough that the university's IRB approved it within a matter of a day, a few hours actually, which was never heard of. Usually takes a while. But that's how thorough the informed consent piece is concerning research in tribal communities, being the past and violations of informed consent on human subject research. But yeah, I love research, and I could probably talk about this more and more, but I really am inspired working with the youth, because when I get a chance to work with the youth, show them practical means of how to apply themselves, whether it's through internships or fellowships or approaching a professor and asking for practical application mentorship. That's how I got involved with research. I went to my professor and asked, hey, I don't know nothing about research. And that next week I was on a doctoral dissertation approval for actual indigenous clinical psychologist student, and learning about their research, and became a research assistant. So it was very hands-on for me, and also learning about it in a post-secondary setting was awesome too. Thank you.
I'm very interested in the continued conversations around just community-led research, community-led data about youth in the community, and just also about data sovereignty. I know we had some initial conversations about that in planning for this session. So I really appreciate all of our panelists today that shared just a little bit about what we hope to offer as a center moving forward, and just engaging all of those who are already involved, maybe because you have an OJJDP grant, But because we have this opportunity to have an open conference and engage those who may not yet be funded under OJJDP, but you're here as a newly developing program or as a community who's interested in developing programs for your youth, we just want you to know the range of services and opportunities there are just to engage in open dialogue. And I truly believe that as a center, we're here as collaborators. Like, we want to be here to be a part of the conversation and offer what we do know, but understanding that we're here to support and be available just to be a part of the conversation and share what we know and work with you if there's issues in the community and there aren't yet solutions, just sharing and part of that dialogue. That's why we're here. So thankful for all of you who have joined today. I'll let our panelists, if there's any other final comments or anything you'd like to share before we close out for today.
And I just wanted to acknowledge kind of the chat conversation that's been going on about there was a chat posted about asking some of the other participants about what's going on in their home community, and Stacy Monroe noted that Xanax, marijuana, and prescription pills and alcohol are what's going on in her community. And an individual, Carmen Red Eagle, noted that at Sherman Indian School saw an increase in vaping. And also there was this mixed information about its danger. And as Gerry was talking about how early on the tobacco products being marketed and being placed at eye level for our youth, vaping has also kind of run that same gambit of being marketed and as a safe alternative to but it's proved that there have been some issues, major issues going on with vaping, as well as in some of the research that we quoted. It's been on the increase. Also, there has been one of our participants posted that we need positive messages for our youth to resist adult peer pressure, to steal items they pawn for money, or for alcohol and cigarettes, for both. These are definitely those things that happen in our tribal communities. Let's see, what else have we said? Interest. We have an individual who's interested in knowing more. Education is important. I think that our Native youth have a stigma about the police department, so therefore they're scared. They don't want to ask. So once again, that's kind of something I wanted to also include is having honest discussions with our youth. Long gone are the just say no days. Long gone are those days of because I told you so, which was one of my favorite as a parent. But having honest discussions with our youth, they probably can teach us. They see so much more than what we would then I would go into a classroom with this nice prevention curriculum and, try and teach them about all the evil. No, listening to them and finding out what they know and, giving them, appropriate information. I really like, that education part of it. And unfortunately, in Southern Oregon, we're seeing an increase in heroin use among our adolescents. So, but yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that these things have been going on in the chat, that they've been having a conversation, a very valuable conversation.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our participants. For those of you that shared, thank you for letting us know some of the issues that are going on in the community. And I would just invite all of you, we did share some resources for this session. if you visit the conference resource area, there are specific resources that are linked to this session. Also, if you subscribe to the TYRC newsletter, there is a subscribe link in the resource section. Sorry, it is the end of a long day. You can get notifications about any of our upcoming training opportunities that will be available. So we would invite you to subscribe to our newsletter. It is bi-monthly, and we share stories from communities. We also share stories specifically from OJJDP tribal grantees. We like to connect everyone with current resources and information that our team comes across. So those are shared in our newsletter. So if you are not yet subscribed to that newsletter, I would invite you to join that, because you can stay connected not only to our center, but to all the resources that we share. We also have some e-weekly announcements that go out. And so please feel free to access any of the resources and information that we provide. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide. This has been a session as part of the Tribal Youth National Virtual Conference from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. We thank you for being a part of this session, and a thank you again to all of our session panelists today. Bye.
Great session. Thank you, Anna, Brother Gerry, Leon, and Kristina. Thank you to all of our participants for attending session D4, a continuum of connectedness, strategies, and considerations for implementing youth substance use reduction initiatives. I just posted an evaluation link in the chat box. Please, please, please take a moment after this session to fill it out. It really will help guide us as a TA center to enhance our TA and to better serve you. There is also, if you go into the main lobby, there is a sign that links to session evaluations. So please, at the conclusion of our OJJDP Tribal Youth Virtual National Conference tomorrow, we ask many, many times, I know we were saying at every session, if you would please take a moment to complete the overall evaluation, because we hope that your feedback, whoever is planning the next session, the next national conference, what you are sharing with us from this conference will really help shape and design the next conference for all of you that serve tribal youth. There is also, if you have been unable to join a session that you're interested in, we have all the recordings will be posted on this platform and will remain up until April 30th. After that time, you may find recordings of all the conference sessions and all the resource materials on the Tribal Youth Resource Center website, www.tribalyouth.org. Again, thank you to our presenters and to each and every one of you for the work that you do for our children and our future generations.